Um, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. For those who don't know me, I'm Jackie Gambrell and I'm the General Manager at TSA. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and paying our respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people on the call this evening. Now, very shortly, I'm going to pass over to Dr. Kate Thomson Bowe, who you want to hear speaking this evening, and I know there's a lot of interest in this subject. But to make sure we can get the most from the technology tonight, I'm also going to be ably assisted this evening by Rob Rosano. I'm very grateful for Rob's support. Rob's the father of a TSC child, so he also has an interest in tonight's presentation, but he's just going to talk us through a few tech tips to make sure that everyone gets the most out of Zoom and that we all get the most out of this evening. So over to you, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and good evening, everyone.
Hi.
Rob, how you going?
Oh, thank you. That's the warm feeling, the love already from the TSA community. Thank you. Look, for today's session, we're hoping to make it somewhat interactive, get you involved in it, in some discussions, perhaps some sharing across the community as well. And so I just want to make sure that you're clear around a couple of the key things that you will need to know in order to get the most from it. So firstly, just give me a kind of thumbs up if you're a Zoom ninja, or perhaps thumbs down if you're less familiar in this space. Just give me a sense. Okay, we've got couple of thumbs up, couple of thumbs down. Okay, a little bit of a mix across the team. So firstly, well, let me just perhaps suggest that the best way to view today's session, Kate's going to be showing some slides as we go through, so that will appear shortly, big and bold in front of you. But what I will also just urge you to do when we're not sharing slides, in the top right hand corner of your screen, you'll see it says either speaker view, or it'll give you kind of a grid, 3x3 little boxes there, and that creates, we'd urge you to do that, creates a bit of a Brady Bunch sort of view, and a lovely way of perhaps seeing all of the other beautiful faces that we've got of the people here today. So might just urge you to do that. Now, in addition to that, couple of the key functions, we've got the chat, and we will be using chat today. So chat can be found at the very bottom of the screen. You'll see a little speech bubble, the word chat underneath it. Just do me a favor, please, everyone, click on that chat icon for me now, and what will pop up is a little chat box. Now, what you can do there is send a message to everyone, or we can send a private message. So firstly, let's just send a message to everyone. Mark and Natalie, love that you've already started with hi guys. Love to get a sense of where we've got people from tonight. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing what state or territory you've joined, just send that as a message to everyone. And Heather, we've got Melbourne, we've got Sydney, Kim, great. We've got Sydney represented. And some of you might notice, yes, Mimi Rossano shares the same surname as me. That's my beautiful wife. We've got people from Singapore. We've got Port Stephens. We've got Portland, Victoria. A real mix. And again, great to see that we're supporting people all over Asia Pacific. Now, in addition to that, you can also change, at the moment you've sent a message to everyone, you can click on where it says everyone and change that to someone in particular. Now, that's the best way. If you're having any tech issues today and you need to reach out to someone, best thing to do is to send a private message to me. So I'm just going to ask you to do that for me now. Change it from everyone to me, Rob Rossano, and just send me a private message. Just hi, hello, g'day. Yep, beautiful. Getting all sorts of messages coming through there. Hey, hi, yo, to you as well. Okay, wonderful. Clearly, you know how this works. So if you do need to reach out, that's the best way. Just send me a private message and I'll do what I can to help you. We'll do some polls and we're going to use the breakouts as well, but that will all become apparent when we get there, and I'll share some further information that you might need to know. But otherwise, we'd love you to have your videos on if you haven't shared. We'd love to just see your faces, and otherwise I will leave you in Jackie and Kate's capable hands for this evening. Enjoy today's session.
Thanks so much, Rob. And look, we will be recording tonight's session, so if for some reason you don't want us to see you or you want to change your name, then please do that. We want everyone to feel very comfortable. Now, before we get into things, we're just going to get a little bit more feel for who's on the call tonight. So we're going to put up a poll, and we just ask you to complete this. It will be done anonymously. It won't show who's saying what. But just really, we want to know, what age is the child with TSC that you're thinking about when you're on the call this evening? And Rob's just going to put the poll up and it gives us a few different age groups.
So that should be popping up any moment now. You'll see the question, what age is your child who has TSC? And love you, input there, enter in your response. And then I'll share back the overall results from the group. We've got fast movers, you lot. We've got most people already there, just waiting on a final couple. Right, well, we've got a bit of a mix. Okay. And thank you, Eileen, for sending that to me in private message instead. We'll factor that in. So here we go, team. Let's just reflect back so you've got a sense of who we've got here. And just give me a thumbs up if you can see that now. You can see those results. Wonderful. Clearly the bulk are in that kind of 2 to 5 years. We've got then the second largest cohort kind of in the 5 to 10 year olds, but obviously we've got some in the 6 months to 2 years and some in the 10 plus.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Rob. And look, now let's get into tonight's presentation, and let me introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Kate Thomson Bowe, who's a specialist paediatric doctor. There she is, waving away to us. Her area of special interest is in childhood disability and helping children and families reach their best potential. Kate's originally from Melbourne, and I know there are people on the call who know Kate from her days down there, but is now in New South Wales, enjoying Newcastle's beautiful weather, beaches and places to walk and run. Now, there will be a couple of breakout groups for you to talk about things that Kate's talking about tonight and share with each other. And in this session, Kate will be suggesting a framework for thinking about behaviour. And you can ask questions via the chat mechanism, as Rob said, but we should stress that this isn't a session for you to ask Kate every single question individual to your child, I'm afraid. We can't provide medical advice on this call, and those questions really need to be taken back to your own clinicians. We also understand that this topic can be quite confronting for people, so please make yourself comfortable in whatever way you can. And now I'm going to hand over to Kate for this evening's presentation. Thank you so much, Kate, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This is my first webinar. It's quite exciting. We've been doing Zoom meetings at work for a little while because of the COVID situations. And I send all my best thoughts to the people in Melbourne at the moment because I have lots of family and friends down there. And I think it's really pause for thought that we're all very spread out in Australia, and it's a long way back to Melbourne for me at the moment, and I'm sure that, you know, it's having huge impacts. As it says on that slide, I have recently joined the Specialised Intellectual Disability Health Team. It's a new initiative that New South Wales Health has generated 6 teams across New South Wales that are really multidisciplinary teams trying to improve the health literacy and capacity of all health workers in the state to meet the needs of people with intellectual disability accessing healthcare services, and also to run a specialised clinic for people across the lifespan with an unmet health need. It's usually a one-off clinic, so we're trying to, I guess, broker a much better access, treatment and experience for people with intellectual disability. I'm also a general paediatrician, and as Jackie said, I'm from Melbourne. I used to work at the Royal Children's Hospital, and I saw a very familiar face on the audience today, so hello. So without further ado, let's go to the next slide. The reason that Jackie explained that we won't be able to, that I'm using a framework approach to childhood behaviour, is that every single one of the children you have in mind has a very different profile and individually needs assessment if behaviours are challenging at different phases of life. And so what I'm trying to do is just give an overview that can be more easily a lens through which to look at behaviour in children who have this specific developmental difference. So I would remind us that, you know, in typical circumstances, most children have a very predictable trajectory or progress through developmental stages. And those things have vast variations based on specific things. So within any population, we'll have a really variety of different intellectual abilities, and genetics plays a massive role, particularly in some conditions. An individual child's temperament and resilience, who they are as a person and a personality, impacts the way they develop. And obviously the neurological disorders or chronic illnesses have impacts. I'll talk a little bit more about environment as we go along. But development is hugely impacted by those early developmental milestones, and a lot of concentration and focus is now being put into what is the first 2,000 days, that's the first 5 years of a child's development, and how can we give every child a secure attachment, emotional availability, consistency and safety so that they optimise their own development. So as a child's development progresses, the behaviours automatically change, and many behaviours which are considered to be atypical or challenging at one age were completely normal at another age and stage. And for healthcare professionals, we also, I guess, use the lens of behaviour to think very hard about a child's emotional development and what they're experiencing at home or in other circumstances, because it's really a very common I guess, flag for emotional problems or challenges that the child and family might be experiencing. Next, please, Rob. So Piaget wrote, and this will be the only sort of theoretical slide I include, about the stages of cognitive development. And if you start this slide at the very bottom with the infants, and what Piaget described was the typical progress of thinking through the ages, but with developmental delay or disability, these stages get very wobbly, they overlap a lot more, and children will develop some skills, more at an age typical rate, and some skills at an age atypical rate. So this is the sort of, every kid's individual, and we have to assess them individually. But generally thinking through the stages, the infant thinks by just sensing, by sight, by sound, by taste, by smell, by usually parental contact, and then they develop that understanding of this, then that, and that cause and effect is the basis of lots of toys that we see in an infant and toddler's age group. The toddler then feels this immense sense of ego. They are the centre, they have the only perspective in the world, and that is the reason that they tantrum. That is the reason that they can't understand anyone else's perspective, and that's completely normal at that stage. And then if we go through the next levels, then children start to understand permanence. They start to be able to think more logically, and then, as you go further along, executive function, motivation, priorities develop at much later stages. Next, please. So we talked a lot already about the individual and biological things that can make differences to development. And I tend to think of this as development and behaviour. How does the child respond to the world, and what is that child's world like? And so all of these nature and nurture aspects will have a large bearing and impact on a child's development. Don't forget, for our trainee paediatricians, we're always trying to teach them not to forget those big things like hearing and vision, to make sure that they're thinking about early developmental emotional development, things like attachment and the impact of temperament. But we also have to think about what children's immediate environment are like, and there are cultural differences about how we raise children, in what circumstances, with what practices, and with what expectations. And so something that is not a problem in one culture will be considered to be quite unusual in another cultural group. think role modeling and expectations is really important, and so I always have a keen thought about what it is that the parent's temperament and work and juggle and what life is like in the whole big system that is a family, rather than just thinking about the child in isolation. Next, please. So, as I've alluded to, I think that we need to consider that every behaviour is normal for a child in a set of circumstances and at a developmental stage. They're almost always communicating something, whether it's their own thought and perspective on the world or a desire to achieve something or get something, and that it's our framework that determines whether we think a behaviour is typical and expected or something that we're finding extremely challenging. Frequently, the reasons that we consider behaviour challenging is when we don't think that it matches that child's expected developmental stage, when behaviours become overly intense or frequent, or when the behaviours are causing harm either to the child, to the environment, or to others. I think it's always important from my medical framework, to make sure that I've considered physical causes, and we'll go through some of those in a minute. Next, please. Oh, we'll go through those right now. My favourite one is thinking very carefully about sleep. It's really common to find that sleep disturbance is impacting not only the individual child's behaviour or tolerance of expectations in the day, but it's also one of the key determinants of how the carers and the other people in the environment are coping with those behaviours or communication attempts. I like to think a lot about whether trying to understand why it is that the behaviour is challenging people around, and frequently that is too much or harmful and destructive. I think it's less common that we see too little, the regression, withdrawal, inattention, and frequently they can be associated with mood or challenging circumstances in child's world, in families, particularly if there's been grief or loss of a family member. It's a stark reminder in our team, in the intellectual disability team, that frequently people who care for people with an intellectual disability haven't had a lot of time to think about the impacts of grief on children with intellectual disability. And so I guess with that hat on, we're thinking a lot about how we give expression to explanation and to grief in children as well. So this is all it. It's a really busy slide, but this is my framework. This is how I, as a doctor, will consider children who have really challenging behaviour. And it really, for me, doesn't matter whether the child has an underlying disorder or not. This is applicable to many children who have what we would consider to be typical development as well. So I think that we need to very carefully consider physical health and well-being, mental health and well-being, and it's often a GP or a paediatrician that will look at a child with a keen eye for not missing teeth pain or headaches or any other sort of medical condition that can sometimes change a child's behaviour fairly dramatically. I am, as all doctors and lots of healthcare providers and teachers, a mandatory reporter, and it's absolutely essential that I'm considering whether a change in behaviour might be a marker of any harm to children. And then further down the track, the doctor is thinking, are there any investigations? What else can we do to evaluate this behaviour or the child? So I think that teams that think about behaviour are most effective when they include the doctor bit, but also a speech pathologist thinking very clearly about communication, an occupational therapist that might have a lens for the sensory profile, and the occupation, the drivers, the motivators, the passions of the child in front of them. They can have both informative impact. We can understand a child much better from that way. They also have therapeutic or actions and strategy solutions that can come out of what a child loves or what drives them. Psychologists and behaviour therapists are key, and they'll often be the person that will bring together all of the other people's thoughts into a cohesive plan that will give positive behaviour support. And for me, when we are talking about children with disability, thinking about what supports the child is receiving and whether there's enough focus on activity and loved activities and things to do to keep kids busy and engaged rather than following a sort of spiraling closer circle, which sometimes happens where a young person's behaviours got really difficult to manage and everything becomes about the behaviour instead of having any focus on what the child's occupations and activities could be. And I think we should never underestimate how important and key those informal supports, more formal supports such as family support services and the other family members having their own healthcare, GP, counselling and support. At different stages of our journey, all of us need those interventions, and to have, as a carer, to have someone you can dip into and talk through things and then dip out of when you don't need it, but that who knows your story so you don't have to start from scratch again is really valuable. And the doctor in me always thinks, okay, is there an illness? Is there any sort of mental health symptoms that are treatable? And then we go around the cycle again and review where we're up to and evaluate what strategies we've used thus far. Next, please, Rob. So this is the first bit where I hand over to you and say, these can be intensely challenging phases that we go through and that come up and down and are amplified at times where families are experiencing all different sorts of stressors that may have, may have been predictable or unpredictable based on society or illness in a family member. But I suggested to Jackie that we let you have a think about where your best supports come from.
So in order to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to have a couple of breakout conversations. We're going to have one now because we'd love people to share, as Kate's already highlighted. Now, no pressure. Share if you feel comfortable to share. Again, that's probably most important for people to feel comfortable here. But in a moment, through the wonder of technology, you're going to be magically transported to a slightly more intimate setting, yourself and 2 or 3 other people. And the focus here is, what have you found as being some of your best support? So again, to tap into this wealth of knowledge from the community and share what's working for you, or if providing you feel comfortable. So I'm going to click this. It's going to happen. It will look like it's maybe closing or crashing. It's not. Give it a moment, a little bit of patience, and you will find yourself there. Welcome back, everyone. And firstly, my apologies if I've rudely interrupted your conversation. Cut you short there. Can I just get a sense, was that enough time? Would you have liked a little bit more time? Would that have been valuable for you? Enough time is thumbs up, more time is thumbs down. Okay, so, and we've got a bit of a happy medium, thank you, from some of you. Okay, so never going to please everyone. We'll do what we can in the time that we've got. But what I'd love to maybe do is just debrief some of that really quickly. I'd love to hear from a few of you if there were some support strategies that you shared, or where have you found a good support. We'd love to just hear from a few of you. And so if you feel comfortable, able or willing, we'd love you to just unmute yourself. You can easily do that by holding down the space bar, and that will unmute you for the time that you're talking or holding it down. Anyone care to share a support? And it could be one that they contributed or one that they heard from somebody else that they thought was interesting or valuable. Now, not all at once. I appreciate it can be a little bit intimidating. It's okay. It's a safe space.
I found that we've had a lot of support from finding the right OT. Has been really helpful for us, for our daughter, with her sensory processing, and then allowing her to make some gains in her development, because that we can control that a little bit better.
Nice, thank you. So selecting the right OT, couldn't agree with you more. What a great survey you've got as well. Yeah. Thanks. Anyone else? Anything else that they found to be really helpful as a support system, strategy, place to go?
We've recently been able to be in touch with a really fantastic pediatrician, and she has been amazing for us. So one who actually listens to me.
I'm the situation here.
Yeah, okay, to you. And that has made a really big difference for us, just in getting access to the things that we need to, because previous to that, I felt like I was really battling the system and trying to get the help that we needed. So yeah, that's made a difference for us.
And thank you so much for sharing, Liz. I totally hear that. You know, when we've got the right person, it makes it so much easier, but it's sometimes hard to know who to turn to, where to go, you know, how to even access that. So, and hence why I think if we can tap into some of the experience that you've had collectively, we might be able to help someone else out and save them a bunch of time and get to the right person potentially a little bit quicker or easier. So thank you, Liz. Really appreciate you sharing that one as well.
So now I'm going to go and drill down a little bit more in each of those areas. So my big tip to the registrars, to the trainees that I see, to people, doctors I talk to, is to really take the effort to get to know the patients and have them cooperate as much as possible and practice having some sort of physical examination. So even if I see children only a couple of times a year, sorry, I'm being distracted by beautiful children, it's really important that we're essentially teaching kids what to expect by coming into health appointments, what it is to have someone listen to their chest, what it is to talk about, you know, tummy ache or poo or whatever else. And what we do is that allows the child to then be more comfortable in assessments. And the real bang for bucks is when they need to be assessed because things are changing or people aren't sure if the child is unwell in some way. If we've put in that time leading up to that need, then we'll be much more successful in having a child who's happy to be examined. And I think that even if you have a paediatrician, you'll probably only see them a few times a year. And so the investment with your GP is really valuable. If you have been sort of navigated through the path with the paediatrician for a lot of a child's life and you're coming to transition, again, if it hasn't been done before now, then in those transition years, sort of 14 to 18, it's really important to start brokering a really good relationship with your local GP. And you know, the checklist I go through is how is the child growing, what sort of nutritional profile do they have? Are they a very restrictive eater? Are we going to be missing certain vitamins and minerals which will have health or behaviour or concentration impacts? And then you can see the rest of the things. And I go really from head to toe when I'm thinking about a child's health and whether or not some unknown symptom might be contributing to a change in behaviour. I think constipation and sleep are the two that are, I reckon, the most frequently where the money lies. It's amazing how frequently a child who has a bit of restriction in their diet becomes incredibly constipated over a period of time with not no poo, but just not enough poo out, and so they get increasingly sore in the tummy, eating goes off, behaviour starts changing, and so frequently that is something that we identify as a easy way of improving comfort for the child, and then communication or behaviour through communication, communication through behaviour changes again. I think our GPs and paediatricians are really useful, and like Liz mentioned, you need to find a GP who really hears you, and will be listening very carefully for features that might suggest mental health symptoms. Anxiety can present in many different ways in children who may not have communication capacity to explain why they're feeling worried or stressed. And so I think that having a regular catch up about a child's mood, frustration tolerance, their capacity for self-regulation is really part of growing a picture of a child over their development, but over time as well. So this is your slide. This is the slide that you're all expert in. Probably I have seen the same, maybe double the number of children as each of you. I think I've had probably 5 patients with tuberous sclerosis complex, because we never had a specific clinic where I was working. We shared and tried to make sure that most of the paediatricians in our team were getting exposure to all of the variety of diagnostic causes of our children's differences in development. And so, in fact, I would imagine that many of the parents on this webinar tonight know all of this. So forgive me while I guess pull out the bits that I think are really relevant to an assessment of behaviour for me. And they are always considering behaviour change as a possible sign and flag for a change in epilepsy, vision, headaches associated with tubers, or, you know, I guess features that are specific to TSC. The population of children with TSC, I guess I've been talking a lot about intellectual disability, and that's because that's the group of children I usually see, but only about 50% of TSC kids will have, or patients will have, an intellectual disability, but we know of those about a third have really severe intellectual disability with the associated communication impairments, often restrictive, repetitive play, and some of the more specific behaviour phenotypes. Autism overlaps in about a third. And as is with a lot of other neurodevelopmental differences, ADHD is a really common association with TSC. And the group of children that have really significant self-injurious behaviour are often the children with more severe intellectual disability and autism phenotype. Next, please. So my biggest, I've talked a little bit about OT, but my biggest light bulb moment for me, and you'll see that that's, you'll be asked to think about your light bulb moments in a little bit, has been about the really what behaviour is trying to communicate. And I've had a variety of patients who've taught me to think very carefully about communication impairments. So I'm frustrated because I can't communicate what I need you to know I'm thinking or wanting, rather than focusing on improving a child's capacity to understand what we want them to hear or to be told. So it's really important to find a tool for every person, which will facilitate their expressive language. Yes, receptive is really important, but for them to be able to express themselves, and often if we can find the key to an individual's best communication strategy, we can alter the behaviours that are due to frustration. So I love sitting down and talking to speechies, particularly those who've got real skills in augmented communication, so other than just using language. And so this is the how else can this child communicate. So, and that's all the things that I've listed there. If you flip to the next slide, it gives you an example of, yeah, sorry, it flew in, I forgot that's how I did it, of Boardmaker. One of our local schools, specialist education schools here in Newcastle, is trying to improve the capacity of every staff member to use Boardmaker, which is, and this is an example of Boardmaker symbols, for all of the staff. And I love what the aim of that is to try and ensure that every teacher is thinking about the child's communication and giving that child a voice for expressive communication. The limitation of that is really that for some children, Boardmakers just gobbledygook on the page. It doesn't make any representative sense to them. And so switches and keyword signing and photographs or real objects and choices with the two real objects. There are a million different ways that we can augment communication. This is my favourite. Mimi just talked about finding, the key was finding an amazing OT. And I think if I wasn't going to be a paediatrician, I think an occupational therapist would be the most satisfying, brilliant thing to do. An occupational therapist will think very hard about what your goals and passions and drivers are, or what the child's is, and also what you like and dislike, where your sensory registration is. So do I overreact to some things? Do I underreact to other things? And those are incredibly important in understanding how aroused, vigilant, uncomfortable a child might be feeling all the time. It can, when those assessments are done, it can uncover what little things trigger behaviours or reactions that we hadn't anticipated. And so recently, the biopsychosocial model was given back to me in a really present form, instead of thinking about everything from a really medical model. And our nurse on our team said, what does a good day look like for our patient? And I just thought, gosh, we should start every conversation with understanding what does a good day look like, so that we don't always focus on what does a bad day look like and what is it we're trying to fix right now, but what does a good day look like, because that informs so much of how we make more of our days good. I think that an OT can often, particularly an OT who's got a real lens for behaviour, can use those assessments to often prescribe some sensory input. And one of my most favourite examples of this in action, I worked at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne with a psychiatrist in a team which is really quite like the specialised ID team that is now set up here in New South Wales. So we were a team for a one-off view of unmet mental health or behavioural concerns in people with an intellectual disability. And we met this young woman who was very triggered by lots of sensory inputs, and a lot of the behaviours that we were seeing or that her mum was seeing, were quite destructive, not necessarily to other people, but to gardens, to plants, to walls in their house, to paper to everyday objects that were in her reach all the time. And what the OT discovered was that this young woman had a resting level of relaxation which was markedly improved if she went to the pool every day. And so her mum took her at 6 a.m. every morning, and this young woman would just jump from in the deep end, and she would hit the wave, hit the water, hit the bottom of the pool and jump back up to the top again, and going up and down and up and down. It was just, she got some sort of sensory feedback in her muscles. And if she did that for about 30 minutes every morning, she was pretty chill at school. She could engage with activities. She could do stuff that if she hadn't been pre-prepared and had that dose every morning, she was unable to she just lived at a much higher stress level and a much more agitated, tuned in level to other people's noises and that kind of thing. So that's called heavy work. That's some sort of muscle deep physical activity that can decrease a child's resting level of arousal. But other things work for other children. So in some kids, their sensory profile will suggest that brushing and that massage will be really calming and help the child. And what's calming at 3 or 4 might be intensely focusing at 6 or 7, and you might have a child who can listen and attend to a speech or a communication activity. So really I think OT is an incredibly valuable contribution to analysis and thinking about a young person's profile, and in combination with their communication, those two things really help to determine what are going to set behaviours and responses on a more even path. Next, please. So these are some of the, I stole these from Google Images, all credit to them. So I've had young people, so the one on the right is my young woman who jumped in and out. Heavy work can also be moving a trolley that's got its wheels tightened, so it's really hard to push. And if you do that with some young kids, they get lots of energy out and they do this hard work, and that also decreases their resting level of arousal. I can't even remember which band that is, but one of my patients really loved that band. It's a boy band, I can't remember their name. And so that really set her mood in a much calmer way. And I have a patient who, one of his motivations and his preferred activities is to rip paper, and it was everywhere, and the house was covered, and it was just, and so the OT thought of having a little pool, and that was where he ripped paper. And so it was easy to clean up, it was easy to tidy up, and it just little things that just make life a little bit more manageable. Don't make him give up his occupation. Yeah, it's not achieving a particular outcome, but he finds it quite relaxing and quite calming and soothing, and it doesn't have to mean anything else for anyone else. Next, please. So I talked about my light bulb moment being this sort of occupational therapy sensory registration and the augmented communication of our speeches. And so the next breakout discussion, for which I think we're running short of time, is what light bulb moments you have had about behaviour.
So we're just going to have a quick conversation here, just a few minutes, again, sharing amongst the community. Same as before, it'll disappear and reappear. And then I believe, Kate, you're going to share some resources and open up some Q&A. But what I'd love to do, perhaps also to help save time so that we can get back to Kate, is just in the chat function. Again, if I can ask you to click on that speech bubble just down at the very bottom of your screen, bring up that chat window, so make sure that it's sending to everyone. I'd love you to, if you feel comfortable, if you're willing, I'd love you to share, what are the light bulbs, whether it's from this or perhaps some of the other conversations you've been having, Kate's slides and obviously knowledge and expertise in this. Anything stood out to you, really resonated or triggered some further thinking? Yeah, and thank you very much, Patricia. Love again that you're willing to share music and singing. That resonates for me. My daughter Roxy has a little speaker in her hand almost all of the time. She's very hip hop. Cool, heavy work. Yeah, great, and thank you, everyone. It's so powerful to see people sharing about what's really resonating for them. So I'll leave you, if you haven't done that, to encourage you to do that. Maybe take a moment and have a quick read and look at some of the other stuff that's coming through. I just love that point of Liz. It's so amazing to realise that you're not alone, and I think that stands out for me as well in these forums. So. Thank you. Back to you, Kate, for your final few slides so we can hopefully...
No worries. I think I've only got 2 left. If you go to the next one. So this is where often if behaviours got really challenging, then we are often at the point of getting a positive behaviour support plan together. And I am really very focused on that psychologist or behaviour therapist spending the time and making sure that they have a really clear view of the occupational therapy and speech pathology recommendations, so that all of those I guess expertise are incorporated into the same thing. I think that we have to think very hard about how we positively reward behaviour rather than taking punitive or consequence actions a lot of the time. And often schools or allied health staff that our children have been working with have got really sometimes it's by luck, they've happened on something that worked really well for our child. And so getting a range of opinions to inform processes, and then everyone to be very consistent about what it is that we're going to, how it is that we're going to respond to a particular behaviour in circumstances. It's really most important that we're catching positive examples of our kids' behaviour when they're requesting help instead of screaming and yelling, or when they are, I guess using quiet inside voices, or they're tapping and touching instead of pulling and hitting. And we reward and positively mark those moments. And the more we do that, the more it is that the child recognises that that's what is gets the reward or gets the praise, and then we get into a positive behaviour cycle instead of a very consequence and limit setting behaviour relationship, I guess. There are also really clear ways of targeting taught behaviour, and your psychologist will often in the younger years use an ABA type approach, or they'll focus on communication. Request for help is a really good one. I think that a lot of children don't know that all they need to do is ask for help, and the adult closest by to them is going to give it. And a lot of what we're hearing, we see people are, parents are having to just guess what the child needs and wants all the time. And so, I only know about 5 or 7 signs, but one of them I know is help. And so teaching families to use, do you need help, is really valuable. And I guess at a sort of, a teenage, young adult end of this conversation, we need to be very focused on least restrictive ways of managing challenging behaviour. And so de-escalating, redirecting, trying all of the things that we know that are not going to, you're in a really challenging cycle if you've got to a point where the response to the behaviour is medicine. And so I think that there's so much that we can do early, and we try not to get into a situation where the behaviours are just so challenging that that's the only thing available to us. I'm not going to talk through the critical incidents, because I think most of the people on this call have children much younger, not in that sort of peri-adult age group where you know, if behaviour is still really challenging, then de-escalation techniques are really required. So my last slide is really just where I got some of my quotes from. I am happy to take a few questions. I really have talked far too long, so you're probably all tired and hungry by now. But yeah, I'll hand back to Rob to see if anyone has any particular questions.
So thank you, Kate. Again, just a reminder to anyone, if you did want to, you're welcome to take yourself off mute and ask the question yourself, or if you'd rather not have your voice heard, you can send a message again through private chat. We've got a couple come through, one in particular around finding the right OT. How do you know you've got the right OT or not? When do you make a call? Any guidance or insight there, Kate?
It is really challenging, and I think that I'm a person that thinks that often it's worth us getting to know each other for a while before we cut ties and say that wasn't what I'm after. So I think us as advocates for children being able to really clearly communicate and to say, my goal or expectation didn't really match what we got out of the last appointment. I'm really keen for, you know, to take it in a strategy or a direction in this way. So I'm frequently about repair, because I don't think we always get it right in a consultation. Pediatricians don't get it right, and OTs and other therapists won't always get it right either. So I'm a keen believer in going back to the person and saying, actually, we tried some of those things and they weren't successful, or I don't think you got what my goal was, and trying to see whether we can realign first. I think that your the best ways, I mean, the NDIS lists are extensive, and trying to figure out who's good and who's not. You seem to have a really, I mean, this is a great network, so sharing names across here I'm sure will be effective for people in similar regions. I think that your pediatrician will often have 2 or 3 people that they might be able to recommend, and a little bit of it, as in almost everything, is suck it and see. So give someone the benefit of the doubt, go in with a really clear communication about what you're hoping to get, or if you don't know what you're hoping to get, but you've got a list of things that you'd like to make as a goal to work on for your family. I think that's how I would approach it.
Thank you, Kate. Any other questions, everyone? Again, open forum. Just wanted to give you all a chance. If you did have something you wanted to ask Kate while we had her here, give you a chance to do that now.
Can I just point out, someone on the chat, Kate, said, I need to look after myself and get sleep and a little time out. And I think recharging our cup is really, really important. I hadn't realised just how important face-to-face contact was for me. And when we came out of lockdown for a little while, I call it filling up my friendship cup, but I think that goes for filling up our energy or our support cups as well, with people who know and understand us. And I think sleep is also incredibly important. So I like that comment.
Mark and Natalie, I think you've got something, please.
Yeah, hi. Kate, my question is more around at what age do you start to seek extra help? We're tapped in with really good services in terms, well, I think quite good OT, physio, speechy, and they're really helping us quite well. But we've had quite complex medical situations with brain surgeries and stuff, so we're struggling to know with Sammy, who's 2 and not even 2.5.
Yeah.
Completely non-verbal. He's struggling with pain, but is it teething? Is it the constipation issues he has? Is it his brain? He's had hydrocephalus. So we're dealing with all of that, or is it just terrible twos? Like, what point would you seek out a behavioural therapist or a psychologist?
I think that's the perfect kind of storm of all of the possible TS things happening to you and your family all at once. I think that having, you know, I'm quite a step-by-step kind of human, and so I would probably seek medical review for each of those things and make sure I had a plan. And okay, if this is what the poo's like, then what do I do? If this is what the pain's like, this is what I do. And have all of those things sort of a plan for, so that you guys have capacity to go backwards and forwards about the medical aspects. I think that your OT is probably a really good guide if you're trying strategies for sleep settling, or, you know, tantrum calming, and you're going around in circles and you feel like it's you've tested them all out, and it's not poo, and it's not headache, and it's not all those things, and the sensory needs are being met in the ways that the OT is recommended, and you're still at a point where a behaviour is more challenging than you anticipate it should be, then I think asking for psychology or behaviour therapy. And if you're with an organisation that has speech and OT, are they all from one service, or have you sought out individual therapists privately? So your single service will probably be able to let you have 2 or 3 sessions with a psychologist to start to analyse those behaviours in that next step way.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Kate.
You're local, aren't you? I saw Port Stephens up there.
Yeah,
yeah. Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for the questions. Over to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Rob. And look, I'd like to thank Kate so much for the presentation and the information this evening. It's just been fantastic. And thanks to Rob for your support. We will be making this available, the recording and the resources that Kate's going to provide us a listing of as well. This is one of our first Zoom events, so we're really keen to know what you thought about it. So Rob's just going to put up a very quick poll. It's anonymous. You can just tell us, did you find it excellent, good or poor? Also, if you have any other feedback about what time of day, what other topics you'd like to see, whether it's too long, too short, all those sorts of things, I'd love you to either message me or email me. I will also email tomorrow asking a few questions, and I'm really appreciative of any feedback whatsoever. But really, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thanks again, Kate and Rob. And if we can just get that poll up, and then everyone can get to their dinner. But thank you for joining us.